In emergencies, you have to think quickly. When someone suffers a cardiac arrest, chest compressions are essential to keep their brain oxygenated until help arrives to defibrillate their heart and restore its rhythm. You stop the bleeding before worrying about a broken bone. But this was different. I sat on the patio, completely clueless about where to begin. My mind raced, but my body felt paralyzed. It was as if everything I'd known about responding to crises failed me now. As a critical care nurse, I had honed my observation skills. I knew how to spot the subtle signs of a patient's decline and act swiftly, often saving lives in the process. But when it came to the demise of my nearly 18-year marriage, I missed the warning signs. I had never intended to save it. I wanted to end it, and painfully. But as I reflected on it, I realized that there were innocent parties involved, and I didn't want to drag them into my anger. I took a long sip of my beer, letting the cold liquid settle in my chest, as I tried to figure out what to do next. My backyard stretched out in front of me, from the patio to the bayou, with just a few trees scattered here and there. The house, a traditional style with modern amenities, was a gift from my father and grandfather when I got engaged. The land had been in our family for generations, and the house had been built by my family's construction company. Despite my father's disappointment in my decision to pursue nursing over joining the family business, I was content with my life. I could afford some luxuries, a boat, fishing gear, and occasional vacations with my family. But now, my family's happiness was at risk, and I didn't know what to do. I looked around and saw my sister's identical house next door. I needed her, so I called her over. "Isn't it early for a drink, Rob?" she asked, noticing my beer. "It's only 2 p.m. I'm off for the weekend." "In the mood," I replied, not really answering her question. She knew my work schedule allowed for frequent time off, and I preferred having a cooler of beer close by so I wouldn't have to make constant trips to the fridge. I offered her a drink, and she sat down. "So, what's so urgent?" she asked. "You told me not to call anyone before talking to you." "I found out Bonnie is cheating on me," I said, my voice shaking. Susan paused for a second, looking at me with disbelief. "Are you sure? Maybe it's a cruel joke?" I nodded, unable to speak, then added, "There's a video? No doubt about it." Susan's face darkened, her expression hardening with anger. "That cheating cow. Doesn't she know you'll destroy her and her lover? Do you know who the guy is?" I asked, my mind swirling. I nodded to respond, but she cut me off. "If Rich ever cheated on me, I'd destroy him," she said with a fiery determination. "How does Bonnie even find time to have an affair? She's home almost every night except for bachelorette parties, where I'm always with her. They work together and usually drive together. He would notice if she was having fun." Her voice trailed off as she looked at my shocked expression. "No way," she exclaimed. "She's cheating with my husband. They're cheating on us with each other." Tears welled up in her eyes, and I quickly went to her, hugging her tightly. I had thought for a couple of hours before making the decision not to grab a weapon, but the anger still burned in me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I love him," Susan said softly, her tears now flowing freely. "But I'm not tolerating this. We need to be smart." I nodded in agreement. "We act normal tonight, just like yesterday. We'll greet them with a kiss." Susan frowned. "Are you serious? We need a plan." "We'll get legal advice tomorrow," I replied, trying to keep my composure. "At least we know we haven't contracted any STDs." Susan pointed at me, half smiling. "Hell no, I didn't even consider that. You know me. I might joke about becoming a TV star, but I'd never actually do it." She finished her beer, tossed the can, and I handed her another. "And for the record, I'm not doing anything with Rich," she added, smirking. "I just got my period." We both laughed, but the weight of our situation hung heavy in the air. "This will last until we confront those cheaters," she said, eyes steely with resolve. "He's not getting anything from me. Bonnie can have him. We can't let the kids know yet." "They left for Mom and Dad's place this morning," I said, my voice more grounded now. "The kids, Jason, 17, Rob, 16, Dave, 16, Cindy, 16, and my daughter Deary, 16, had spent the entire summer together. They were more like siblings than cousins, especially during the pandemic when they were always together. Rich had been a good father and uncle, involved in the kids' education and activities. I handled the outdoor fun, teaching them camping, fishing, and hunting. 3 weeks ago, I continued. I rearranged my work schedule to get 6 days off in a row. I took the girls in one boat, and the boys went in another. We traveled slowly to avoid snags and shallow waters, stopping occasionally so everyone could take turns driving. We spent a week at the Old Poo Fish Camp, fishing and catching crabs. It was supposed to be a bonding experience for the family, or so I thought. Apparently, Bonnie and Rich didn't value family unity. The thought of telling the kids about their affair broke my heart. Family meant everything to me, and destroying that unity would be unforgivable. I voiced my concerns to Susan. "We can't hide it from them," she said softly, but then quickly added, "But we can delay it a bit. I'll make sure they don't sense anything is wrong." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation. "I can't forgive or forget infidelity, no matter what Bonnie says," I replied, my voice tight with emotion. Susan nodded in agreement. "I can tolerate a lot, but not cheating. I need to figure out how to get rid of her without losing everything. I won't risk jail or let her take the kids." I cracked open another beer, the bitter taste grounding me as I stewed in anger and frustration. "I get it," I said. "We need to break him financially. I'm going to take every penny I can. Child support, alimony, everything." Susan agreed. "Rich earns more, so I have a better chance. But Bonnie could drive you to the pin. Courts often favor women in divorce cases." I nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "I handle trusts and wills in my job, but I know enough about the law to say our assets are protected," Susan continued. "Our houses are safe. Dad gave them to us before we married, so Bonnie and Rich can't claim them. Bonnie might try to stay in your house until the kids are grown, but she can't claim it. Didn't you and Bonnie sign a prenup?" "Yeah," I muttered. "Dad insisted. It says if either party cheats, they only get 20% of the joint assets and no alimony. Bonnie's father, a wealthy plastic surgeon, made sure of that. He wasn't thrilled when I got his daughter pregnant. He feared I'd take half his fortune. My father also made Susan and Rich sign a similar agreement." "I'm worried about that video," Susan said, her voice growing more serious. "Who filmed it and how?" "I don't know," I admitted, looking at the tablet in my hands. There were at least 3 cameras. The video showed the same event from different angles, and it didn't look edited. Neither Rich nor Bonnie seemed to know they were being recorded. Susan insisted I show her the video, and when she saw it, her face went red with fury. "Holy crap," she said, her hands shaking. "Rich and Bonnie's comments about how you and I were clueless, infuriating." "Rich is done," I said flatly, "but we need to find out who made the video. I don't want it coming back to haunt us." "I don't care if the world sees it," Susan replied, "as long as it doesn't affect us." I agreed, suggesting we hold off on a public reaction. Susan sat quietly, lost in thought for a few moments before she suddenly burst into tears. I reached out, pulling her into a hug as we both cried, unable to hold it in any longer. That night, I greeted Bonnie at the door with a kiss and a hug, expecting her to pull away, but she didn't. She kissed me back. I couldn't detect any trace of aftershave, just her perfume. Despite my fury, I told her dinner was ready. Susan and I had already planned to order takeout, neither of us wanting to cook. We joked about poisoning our spouses, but it was a way to vent, not a real option. The next morning, I watched Bonnie get into Rich's car, my stomach sinking. I immediately called Susan. "How'd it go?" "No problem," she replied, her voice light but tinged with frustration. "Joking and planning helped me keep my cool. Any idea where they're going tonight?" Susan, always a bit of a loose cannon, needed to vent, but I had to be honest with her. At 10 a.m. the next day, we were in the office of one of Susan's bosses, Jake, a divorce attorney and an old friend. He agreed to represent us. "Are you sure you have a video showing both parties?" Jake asked. We both nodded. "We do, but we're not showing it yet. As long as you have evidence of infidelity, you're good," Jake assured us. "Your prenuptial agreements are strict. Rob, did you consult a lawyer before signing?" I explained that my father had insisted on a legal opinion, and Susan used the same document. The cheater only gets 20% of joint assets, including savings and investments. There are no provisions for personal income accounts, Jake explained. Do either of you have any hidden income? We shook our heads. No. What if Bonnie has money she didn't tell me about? I asked. Common property, Jake replied, raising an eyebrow. Like if you bought something without telling her. Home improvements can be tricky. Your homes are protected because they were gifted before marriage, but things like solar panels might be considered common property. So, she only gets 20% because she's a cheater, right? I nodded, grateful for Jake's insight, but my mind was already spinning with the next steps. I asked, I'm willing to give her that. We can negotiate the division of furniture and other items. She'll have to pay for transportation and storage if she wants to take anything. Jake grinned. These are the games we'll play, he said. The important thing is your ironclad prenup. As long as you prove infidelity, keep the video copies hidden and confidential. If they sue over the video being made public, it depends on how it was obtained. Be careful. Susan and I nodded. We had considered editing the video and sharing it with friends and family, but we were worried about the impact it would have on our kids. Now, we were more determined than ever to find out who filmed it. We decided to serve the divorce papers on Thursday at noon, but I suggested waiting until Friday afternoon so they would have to worry all weekend without legal advice. Jay convinced us to stick with Thursday, saying it would save costs and still keep them busy with financial statements all weekend, likely increasing their legal fees. Initially, we wanted to serve them in person to see their reactions, but Jake advised against it. Instead, we agreed to serve them at work in front of their colleagues. After leaving Jake's office, we went to the bank to transfer money into new accounts in our names only, ensuring we had statements for all accounts we paid off and canceled. We also opened new credit cards under our names only. I checked my email and found 3 more videos of Bonnie and Rich. I thanked the sender and asked how they got the videos, expressing concern about them going public. Secretly, I wished they would be released, but I knew we had to be cautious to avoid a lawsuit. An hour later, I received an email with an address, 9203 Victoria Street, apartment 2011. I visited the address and convinced the woman at the counter to give me information by implying the tenant was involved in criminal activities. She gave me the details. The apartment was rented by the insurance company where Rich and Bonnie worked, with Rich's signature on the contract. I wondered how the company would react if they found out they were paying for Rich's affair. Bonnie called me at 12:30 p.m., furious about the divorce papers. I calmly told her I knew she had found someone else and that I was setting her free. We had rehearsed our responses. Bonnie angrily denied the affair, accusing me of believing rumors and threatening to take everything in the divorce, including custody of the kids, child support, and half of our assets. She suggested Rich could move in with her and I could live with Susan, imagining what they were doing in my house. Go ahead, I said. Get yourself a lawyer. I barely kept my voice steady, struggling with the regret of my marriage falling apart and anger at her stubborn denial. I hoped Susan hadn't revealed too much to Rich. By the way, the girls are packing your things, Susan told me. I told the boys to pack Rich's stuff. Everything will be in front of the house for you to pick up this afternoon. We got a restraining order and changed the locks this morning. You'll have to find another place to stay until the court decides. Bonnie started yelling, so I hung up. 10 minutes later, Susan texted, "Backyard, bring your cooler. Make sure it's full." "That fool, Rich," she began, sipping her beer. He tried to blame it on some secretary's gossip. I told him Bonnie did the same. He denied everything and said we shouldn't believe it. I told him to get his stuff. "Really?" I asked. "Yes, I told him to call first because I had a loaded weapon. Jake will be here soon with 2 sheriff's deputies to keep things from getting out of hand." I realized having deputies present was smart. Rich might provoke me, and I could end up in jail for assault. I was already in a controlled panic mode, like during emergencies. Susan continued, "I'm glad you talked to the kids earlier. I couldn't have done it without breaking down." We gathered the kids, and I told them what was happening. Surprisingly, they seemed to expect it and started packing. "Bonnie and Rich's stuff," Susan said. The kids took it surprisingly well. Maybe they're in shock or don't realize how it will affect them. My phone beeped with an email. I wonder if it's from Pissed Off 999, I said. Check it, Susan insisted. She showed me how to open it, and we listened to an audio file. Can you believe Robert and Susan served us? Bonnie said. They must have found out somehow. I can't believe this. Just last night, Robert was so affectionate. Relax, Rich replied. They don't know anything. Someone must have gossiped about us having lunch or driving together. We need to deny everything. If they go through with this divorce, we'll make them pay. I know a lawyer who will help us. Just don't admit anything. Act like everything you say is being recorded. After listening, Susan and I were silent. Okay, let them think we don't know anything, I said. Rich mentioned they'd been planning something for a long time. We need to ensure we're protected if they do something illegal. Susan nodded, tears in her eyes. We have to hold firm. I know, Susan said quietly. Jake said, I'm in a better position, but courts tend to favor women. Still, I can't stand the idea of Bonnie getting custody of Jason and Deary and living in my house until Deary turns 18. Even with the prenup, it's a nightmare if she stays rent-free while I'm stuck paying child support. I feel the same, but I hugged Susan as she cried, assuring her that we would come out victorious, though, truthfully, I wasn't sure. Divorce is all about minimizing losses, and the children were silent as Susan and I entered the house. Deary and Cindy were packing Bonnie's clothes into suitcases and bags, now resorting to plastic garbage bags. I asked them to take pictures of the luggage, planning to apply its value to Bonnie's share of the assets. Next door, the boys were almost done with Rich's things. He had fewer clothes, and the boys were stuffing them into bags, not even bothering to fold them. I smiled when I saw Rob stuff a $2,000 suit into a bag. They had my back. Bonnie texted me, and I called Jake, who showed up with 2 sheriff's deputies. Jake told me to relax and enjoy myself. Bonnie and Rich arrived with another familiar face, Budrow Landry, a bully from elementary school. Hey, Robert, Budrow smirked. I hear you're having trouble with your wife and son-in-law. No big deal. If I had a weapon, I would have shot him. Budrow was huge, and fighting him wasn't an option. Hey, Budrow, I said. We're just trying to work it out. You don't seriously think my boy Rich is with your wife, do you? Budrow asked with a grin. That's the story, I said. Jake moved closer. I can't deal with it, Bonnie accused me. You took all the money from our bank account. Yes, I replied. And I have statements showing the original amounts. You'll get what you're owed. She didn't know that her credit card would no longer work. Susan and I didn't accompany Rich and Bonnie into the house. Deary, Dre, and Cindy followed Bonnie and a deputy, ensuring nothing funny happened. Jason and Rob followed Rich. Where's my jewelry? Bonnie asked. This had always been a major point of contention. Over the years, I bought her high-quality jewelry worth at least $25,000, most of it locked in my safe. I had taken pictures of Bonnie's ring and necklace for insurance purposes, and I wanted proof of ownership. Budrow started to argue but stopped when I explained that I had taken pictures to prevent the jewelry from going missing. Jake stepped in, suggesting a new appraisal of all assets. After consulting with Budrow, Bonnie calmly removed her jewelry and handed it to me. Where am I supposed to go? She asked. I nearly suggested her love nest on Victoria Street, but held back. I shrugged, realizing my emotions had shifted. Days ago, I loved this woman, but now I felt nothing but anger and coldness toward her. Bonnie and Rich finally left, with Budrow following. I wondered if they were heading to the apartment. Jake smiled. I hope so. We have someone following them. If we reveal the apartment now, it will help our negotiations. Instead, they went to the Holiday Inn near their office. Cheerfully, I helped them move their things inside. I needed more flash drives for backups of the audio and video files. Susan and the girls were making dinner when my phone beeped with another email. Susan followed me to the computer. Okay, guys, Bud's voice said. Someone's probably following Robert. Stay at a motel and get a room with 2 beds. Make sure both beds look used. The investigator can bribe the maid to check. We'll say you're sharing a room to save money. It was embarrassing when my card was declined, Rich said. Good thing I took extra cash. What's next? I asked. I'll call the credit card company to open a new account, Budrow continued. Robert's thought about jewelry. He likely has a list. Protect any hidden assets legally. They're community property, but what Robert and Susan don't know about, they can't claim. Don't hide too much, or you might get caught. If you have a secret bank account, make sure it holds only a small amount. Offshore accounts are better. You don't want to be caught lying under oath. Now what? Bonnie asked. They can find our Baton Rouge accounts, Rich exclaimed. Screw that. We'll fly to the Cayman Islands and open an account there. Make the room look used. Wet the tissues, ruffle the towels, wet the shower, and use some shampoo. I'll call the office and say we're off tomorrow, Rich said, as the audio file ended. Do they have secret bank accounts? Susan sighed. Where did the money come from? I see the bank statements, I said. He couldn't have hidden much. I felt bad, too. Bonnie and I got $50 weekly for travel cash, and we both reviewed the credit card statements monthly. I told the apartment woman that Rich was into pills and cocaine as a bluff, but now I wondered, could he be hiding something more? We decided to leave it for the night and joined the kids for dinner. There wasn't much we could do about hidden bank accounts anyway. The next morning, I drove to Jake's office, having arranged for a jewelry appraisal and an estimate for my firearms from a local dealer. Susan went to work briefly, and we met at Jake's office, where I played the audio files from the previous day. I'd like to know who's sending these, Jake said. How they bugged Bonnie and Rich in the hotel is beyond me. A private investigator couldn't have done it that fast. We might need a judge's order to find their bank account balances, which could mean hiring an investigator, he continued. Susan and I shook our heads when asked if we had noticed any missing money. If you want this divorce quickly like you said, we'll move fast, Jake said. Next week we'll meet with Bonnie, Rich, and their lawyer to list assets, then go before a judge. Louisiana's Napoleonic laws make divorce easier, especially with proven infidelity. Counseling won't help. Once the judge rules, you'll wait 6 months and it's over. Jake added, Budrow called, demanding you release an extra 30% of the money you withdrew. I reminded him that the prenup states the cheater only gets 20% of the assets. He demanded proof of infidelity, which we'll present in court. It was amusing to see him flounder. I'd love to get an audio tape of him advising hiding money offshore into the courtroom, I muttered, my frustration mounting. I had to work that weekend. The head nurse, Sharon, couldn't cover my shifts. What if I start coughing and need a COVID test? I asked. Idiot, Sharon said affectionately. Yes, I could fill in. You have vacation and sick days saved up. Take an emergency vacation if needed. I can't believe Bonnie did this to you. How about I work this weekend and start my vacation on Monday? I suggested. Really? Thank you. I owe you one, Sharon said. I'll start your sick leave and then vacation. Take as much as you need, and keep me posted. Working was a welcome relief. Weekends were busy, but ICU staff had to stay alert. I was surprised to see my father-in-law, Dr. Pran, waiting for me at the nurse's station. Hello, Dr. Pran. What brings you to the ICU? I greeted him, knowing the staff would be curious. Cut the crap and let's talk, he hissed in the head nurse's office. He asked, What's this about you kicking Bonnie out? She called her mother, sobbing, I said bluntly. I found out Bonnie is cheating on me with my sister's husband. I'm dealing with a family crisis. It was a rumor started by gossipers at the office, John said. They commute together and often have lunch together. She told us the rumors about an affair with her boss were just that, rumors. I decided to be open with him despite our history. I haven't told anyone except my lawyer and my sister. I haven't even told Bonnie and Rich everything I know, let alone the kids, I said, holding back my emotions. I have proof, video and audio files. This isn't just a rumor. Dr. Pran looked shocked. What are you going to do? He asked softly, already knowing the answer. What can I do? I replied. I'm trying to protect the kids, but I can't just ignore this. John sighed, tears in his eyes. What would you do if Bonnie had proof I was cheating? I'd want your head on a platter, he said honestly. I'd help her bury you. What about Jason and De'Ara? How are they handling it? He asked. They're talking more with their cousins than with Susan or me. They seem to be holding up, but they're angry with Bonnie. I told them they need to talk to her, but I don't know if they have. I'm not getting involved in this, John said. I thought you were overreacting to gossip. My first priority is to protect Jason and De'Ara, I said, nodding. And I'll help Bonnie with her physical needs. I don't excuse her behavior, but if you have irrefutable proof, I accept it. Stay in touch. You're an honorable man. He walked out, his shoulders slumped. I felt more sorry for him than for Bonnie. Wow, Susan said when I got home. So he knows his daughter isn't so virtuous. We need to tell Mom and Dad soon, I said. How about tomorrow night after your shift? We don't want them to be mad at us for keeping them in the dark. I agreed, and the meeting wasn't pleasant. My father only asked if I had proof, and I assured him I did. Like John, he was more concerned about the kids than about us, which I understood. In our culture, children came first, and adults dealt with the consequences of their actions. Children were protected, but informed to learn. I received no additional information from my mysterious benefactor, which, in hindsight, was fine. I already had 4 explicit videotapes showing Bonnie and Rich, along with audio recordings that clearly proved their long-term affair. I didn't need more proof. Bonnie not only cheated, but also financially defrauded the family. The mystery of how she managed to save enough to fly to the Cayman Islands only infuriated me further. She was a thief and a fraud, and I was determined to bring her down. Jake had begun investigating their accounts, using social security numbers to subpoena statements in case any of the money had been siphoned off. Some of our questions were answered the following Wednesday when we met with a court-appointed financial arbitrator to list our total assets. The auditor went over the paperwork I provided, including my annual salary and Bonnie's pay stub. Bonnie made $5,000 a month, while my salary varied with overtime, but we both earned similar amounts annually. Jake said this would allow for minimal alimony, even without the prenup and proof of infidelity. On Monday, the auditor requested our income tax returns for the past few years. I found them in our desk, while Susan had to get copies from her accountant. She was upset that Rich hadn't filed his returns with the other documents. She knew Rich earned about $80,000 compared to her $50,000 and was pleased when Jake said she'd likely receive a sizable maintenance payment. Then, Budrow entered the conference room, flanked by a sullen Rich and Bonnie. Bonnie glared at me, her anger surprising me. I expected at least an apology, but she remained silent, likely taking advice from Budrow. Rich struggled to maintain a neutral expression. The court officer introduced himself and his assistant, who took notes and kept an electronic record. "Let's get started," the officer said. "Your attorneys have forms for you to sign confirming that your statements today are true and may be admitted into evidence. Our goal is to compile a list of all assets and income for the judge to review. We won't discuss prenuptial agreements today. Regarding car valuation, we'll use the standard Blue Book value. If the car your child drives is registered in your name, we can consider it separate from community property if both parties agree. We'll get to the money later. Let's start with Mr. and Mrs. Fontano. Listing the automobiles, firearms, boat, and household goods took only a few minutes. Even Bonnie's jewelry wasn't a problem. I had it appraised, and its value exceeded that of my truck and firearms combined. Budrow insisted that the solar system be considered separately and prepared a document stating its value and depreciation. Jake reviewed it, made a few notes, and nodded. When we reviewed the 401k accounts, I asked why they were included, thinking they should be excluded. "No," Jake replied. "They count because you've been married for over 10 years. But in your case, the values are similar, so it's not a big issue." We then went over the checking and savings accounts. Jake entered the statement showing that I had taken 80% of the funds and did the same for Susan and Rich. "It's straightforward," said the auditor. "Mr. Jacobs, there's a big discrepancy between Mrs. Fontano's salary estimate and her tax returns for the last 2 years. Rich tensed up. "I've estimated each of you earned $600, I explained. I multiplied her monthly salary by 12. "Yes, but for the last 2 years, Mrs. Fontano reported an income of $140,000 annually, the assistant said. I was incredulous. "What the hell?" I asked. The assistant frowned. "Didn't you look at your tax return?" he asked. I shook my head and explained that Bonnie and Rich had a new accountant handle our taxes electronically. I had just looked at the small refund we received. Bonnie turned purple. Her salary includes $80,000 in bonuses each year, Mr. Jacobs said. I looked at Budrow and Mr. Jenkins, who had gotten $110,000 in bonuses each year. Jacobs continued. Susan asked, how much extra was that? Net about $80,000 a year, totaling about $16,000, Jacobs answered. So where's the money, Bonnie? I demanded. Is that why you went to the Cayman Islands last Friday? To hide it? Bonnie angrily asked, how did you find out? Are you following me? Then, she composed herself. No, I said. You did it yourself. Both you and Susan insisted the kids install phone locator apps. Jason and De'Ara used it to track you when you didn't answer them on Friday. They saw you reappear near the coast, suggesting you were in the Cayman Islands. Bonnie and Rich looked astonished. They checked your office on Monday and saw you weren't home, but in Baton Rouge, likely transferring money into new accounts. I added, Jake spoke up, Budrow, we can get statements to prove those account balances. It's illegal to hide money offshore to avoid distributing joint assets. Your clients flew to the Cayman Islands right after hiring you. Hiding assets like this is a felony. Bonnie began to cry, and even Rich looked scared. Budrow's face turned pale, and then he read, I didn't do anything like that, he declared, looking at the recorder and Jacobs's assistant typing away. Susan asked, Jake, can we get them to return the money? Jake nodded. Yes, we'd get our share in the end, even if we have to confiscate their paychecks. 80% of those accounts will become yours once infidelity is proven in court. But there's no money left, Bonnie exclaimed. It disappeared when we tried to transfer it. Rich tried to silence her, but she continued, I think you stole it, she accused me. I looked at her incredulously. I didn't know for sure about the money until recently, I said. I suspected it, but I had no idea of the amounts. What are you claiming now? Did you spend it all or lose it? Both are nonsense. She explained that they tried to transfer the money electronically at the bank in Grand Cayman, but the transfer was denied. They then went to Baton Rouge to investigate, where the online statement showed the transfer, but no routing number or account details. Provide me with the bank information for the Baton Rouge account, and I will investigate, said Mr. Jacobs. I can get the results faster and enter them into the court documents. Rich and Bonnie left the room looking dejected. Susan wondered where the money had gone, and I shrugged. Sharing her thoughts, our case was expedited, likely because Bonnie and Rich had begged Budrow to speed things up. They stayed at the Holiday Inn for a week before moving to the apartment on Victoria Street. It amused me to think about them in their love nest, likely struggling with cash flow and Budrow's fees. All 5 children insisted on attending the hearing, and I agreed, since they were affected by the divorce. Jake explained what to expect. Judge Goody conducted his hearing semi-formally, sitting at the table with us. Jake, Susan, and I sat to Bud's left, with Rich and Bonnie across from us. The kids sat in the gallery. Following Jake's lead, we stood as the judge entered, and he waved for us to sit. I handle family cases in a semi-formal setting, he explained. Sit and speak when I address you. Raise your hand if you want to speak. Be on your best behavior and respectful. If you piss me off, I'll throw you out. The kids managed to hold back their laughter at his last statement. Well, I've reviewed both cases. Normally, we treat these as separate matters, but the evidence and parties involved are the same here. A sibling is accused of infidelity. In Louisiana, while infidelity alone isn't grounds for divorce, there are prenuptial agreements that affect property distribution in such cases. Therefore, I'll need irrefutable evidence of infidelity first. The judge continued. There were discrepancies regarding monetary assets with allegations of hiding funds. My investigation shows Mrs. Fontano and Mr. Jenkins have bank accounts in Baton Rouge with balances of $120,000 and $160,000, respectively. The entire balance was transferred from these accounts the Monday before the divorce petition was filed. The correct passwords and security questions were used, indicating the transfers were made by Mrs. Fontano and Mr. Jenkins, or someone they authorized. Further investigation revealed the money was split evenly among 5 accounts belonging to their children, Jason and De'Ara Fontano, and Robert, Dave, and Cynthia Jenkins. These transfers are legal under the Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. The accounts were set up years ago, likely for college or income in the event of a parent's passing. I was stunned. Why was Bonnie making such a fuss if she had given the money to her children? The judge continued. The parents showed responsibility, if not remorse, by giving the money to their children. Such deposits are non-refundable unless fraud is proven. Does anyone have proof of fraud? I was thrilled. I would have liked my 80%, but knowing the money was divided among the children was satisfying. Rich and Bonnie looked shocked, suspecting that we had outsmarted them. When Judge Goody asked if we had proof of fraud, we all shook our heads and said, "No, Your Honor." They seemed terrified of possible charges for hiding money overseas. None of them appeared willing to rebut the judge's remarks. The next matter is the establishment of custody of the minor children, the judge said. My daughter, De'Ara, raised her hand. Yes, Your Honor, she said. I read that children 15 and older can choose which parent to live with. In some states, yes, Judge Goody replied. In Louisiana, I consider the children's opinions after speaking to them privately. De'Ara stood and stated, I don't need to talk privately. My mother cheated on my father and ruined our entire family. I want to live with my dad. Jason stood up and agreed. Robert, Dave, and Cindy also stood, stating they wanted to live with their mother for the same reason. My heart raced under the table as I squeezed Susan's hand. I will consider your wishes, Judge Goody said with a half smile. But it hasn't yet been established that there was, as you put it, treason. De'Ara raised her hand again, and the judge turned to her. I also read that a 16-year-old can petition the court for emancipation, and 17-year-olds can leave home without a petition. Yes, the judge replied. The 17-year-old rule is an old law for young men wanting to enlist in the military without parental consent. For a 16-year-old to petition for emancipation, they must be able to support themselves. Is that clear? De'Ara nodded. I have a college fund with another $56,000 added to it, plus what my parents and grandparents contributed. Cindy stood up. Me too. Collectively, we have plenty of money to live on our own for a long time. Her brother, Dave, stood and smiled. Me too. We could rent a nice place together. Jason and Rob stood up and said that if they pooled their money, all five could live fine on their own. I glanced at the judge, who seemed to suppress a laugh. Let me guess, he said. If I don't go along with your wishes, you'll all petition for emancipation or leave on your own? The five heads nodded. Sit down, he commanded. I'll consider what you said. There's an allegation of infidelity in this case, which affects the prenuptial agreement and property distribution, so I'm going to ask for evidence of infidelity. Jake stood up. Your Honor, I have these pictures of Richard Jenkins and Bonnie Font together. Budrow objected. Anyone can alter photos, he said. I have a picture of me shaking hands with the president and another of us playing golf made by my son. As a joke? Defense counsel hasn't identified the source of this evidence. Judge Goody looked at Jake, then at Susan and me. Jake nodded for me to respond. Your Honor, the evidence came from an anonymous source. I received several video and audio files and took these screenshots from one of the videos. I have the full video on a DVD and thumb drive. I looked at Rich and Bonnie, who appeared shocked and agitated, shaking their heads in disbelief. Judge Goody observed their reactions, noting their purple faces in clear distress. Okay, do I need to reproduce the file Mr. Fontano provided? Or do all parties agree that infidelity occurred? Judge Goody asked. Budrow wanted to see the footage, but when Bonnie and Rich quickly pleaded with the judge not to show the video, he backtracked. Could you spare a minute for my clients, Your Honor? After consulting with them, he reluctantly said, We agree with the plaintiff's claims. Well, in that case, I will announce my verdict, Judge Goody said. Since all parties agree infidelity occurred, the marriage contracts will be honored in each case. Susan and I were awarded 80% of the community property. Judge Goody suggested, we discussed the actual distribution with our attorneys to avoid court involvement in the details for custodial parents. I grant Robert Fontano full custody of Jason and De'Ara Fontano and Susan Jenkins custody of Cynthia, Robert, and David Jenkins as requested. The non-custodial parents have full visitation rights. Legally, the divorce will be finalized in 6 months. The increased incomes require Bonnie to pay me $1,000 a month and Rich to pay Susan $2,000 a month for the next 3 years. Each dependent child will receive $500 a month until they turn 18. Jake said the payments were minimal and suggested we could appeal, but I decided against it, and Susan followed my lead. After the judge ended the hearing, we left. Jake said he would arrange a meeting to work out property distribution details. I told the kids to go home, change, and wait for me for a family meeting. Susan and I walked to the back of the courtroom where my father was waiting. "So, when did you figure it out?" I asked him. Susan looked puzzled, and Dad replied, "It hit me when De'Ara and Cindy made those comments about the video." I said to Susan, "Pissed Off 999 is a personality the kids invented." Susan's mouth dropped open. "No," she said, as I continued. "Yeah, I figured it out a few days ago when I saw an old credit card bill. Jason and Rob asked me 2 months ago for a credit card to plan something special for your anniversary. They promised to reimburse me about $500. The statement showed a purchase from an electronics company. Initially, I didn't pay attention, but when I called the company, they revealed the kids bought cell phone bugs. The kids spent $500 on spy devices? I asked. "Yes," he said. "Apparently, they were expensive. I didn't know where they got the video cameras, but they followed me home to find out more." All 5 children were waiting in the living room when we arrived. They fell silent as we walked in. "Go to the kitchen and sit down," I said. Susan grabbed 3 beers and handed one to Dad and me. Jason and Rob held out their hands, grinning. "You may be old enough to be spies, but not old enough to drink," I said. They shrugged, knowing I wasn't angry. "Okay, who wants to start?" "Let's begin at the beginning," De'Ara began. "It all started when Cindy and I stopped by my mom's office and she wasn't there. Neither was Uncle Rich. This was around the time they began phase 2 of the COVID lockdown. We thought we could get some money from one of them to see a movie. The receptionist said they were out and had left long ago. It was well past lunchtime, so we decided to track them. You know, we have a locator feature my mom insisted on installing on our phones. It showed they were at a strange address, so we checked it out. It was an apartment building. When we arrived, we saw Uncle Rich's car and waited. They came out later, walking hand in hand and smiling. That got us thinking. So, we started tracking where they went over the next few days. For 3 days straight, they returned to the same place and stayed for about an hour and a half each time. Sometimes they went there late at night after work, but before going home. "We told the boys about it," Rob continued. "We searched the internet and found bugs you can insert into cell phones. After downloading an app, it works like a continuous phone call in the background and doesn't interfere with regular calls. It does drain the battery a bit faster. It transmits all the sounds around the phone so you can eavesdrop. We talked Pop into letting us use his credit card to buy them. Sorry, we lied a bit. Pal, installing the bugs and the app on their phones was easy. We took turns checking them and eavesdropping on conversations. We recorded anything interesting to share later. So that's clear with the audio recordings, but how did you get the video and find out which apartment they used?" I asked. "We looked at their keys. They both had a key marked 2011. That's not their office number, so Jason copied his mom's key. We went into the apartment a couple of times and looked around. We decided we needed cameras," De'Ara explained. "So we bought a few with a small transmitter," added Dave, excited about the technology. He didn't realize he was describing the end of several marriages and the breakup of 2 families. "At least Susan and I got some answers," I said. "The cameras were motion sensitive, so they didn't burn too many batteries. We hid the receiver under the couch. The receiver got information from the cameras and transmitted it to our receiver. We recorded it." "So, you took a video of Bonnie and Rich doing it. You also recorded audio files and sent some to me?" I asked, trying to make sense of everything. The room fell quiet as the weight of the situation hit us all. I spoke carefully, trying to make sure I didn't say anything that would ruin my relationship with my kids, my nephews, and my nieces. These were my family, and no matter how deep the betrayal ran, I couldn't let that fracture my bond with them. But there was another issue that needed to be addressed: money. "Dad, when Cindy and I first looked at that apartment, I realized our mom was gone," De'Ara said slowly. "Well, not gone, but not back to where our family used to be. She paused. They had clothes stashed away, and Mom had some outfits I recognized. She had a makeup kit, towels, and washcloths too. We knew what they were doing. They'd work out, clean up, and then come home to you and Aunt Sue like nothing had happened. We were all furious. They weren't just cheating on you and Aunt Sue, they were cheating on us too. The weight of her words hung in the air. But then Cindy chimed in. Now, about the money, the secret bank accounts were a side issue. She leaned forward. When we looked around the apartment, we found some bank account papers. There were instructions on how to access it online. It took a while to find the actual accounts. We even spent time in Dad and Aunt Bonnie's offices, peeking in on them a couple of times. The receptionist let us in to wait for them, and she giggled. We looked through a bunch of folders and finally found one in the bottom drawer of Dad's desk with some applications. We looked in Aunt Bonnie's office too, Cindy continued, and found more papers. Aunt Bonnie had a small notebook in her purse with passwords and stuff in it. It didn't say secret bank account, but we could tell it was important. The password was unusual, much more so than the one she uses for her cell phone, and it worked. It took a while, but eventually, we realized it was the right password. They were using the same one for both accounts. Jason took control of the situation. We already knew they were up to something shady when we discovered their hidden bank accounts. We were really angry. We wondered if they were dealing pills or embezzling money. Dave was the one who came up with the idea of putting money in our accounts. Dave blushed but nodded. Actually, I said we can't let Dad and Aunt Bonnie get rich and leave us hanging. We read about dividing assets in a divorce, and we didn't like the idea of them keeping half the money either. We had accounts set up by Powwow, and I thought maybe we should take all the money. I thought the cops might catch us, but since we were minors and it was our parents' money, we figured we wouldn't get in serious trouble. We thought it might work, so we did it. If we'd known about the 80/20th share, we probably wouldn't have taken it though. De'Ara looked at the ground, her voice soft. It actually worked out better that way though. And then you guys started sending me video and audio files, I said. Looking around the table, I was at least a little relieved to see an expression of restraint rather than outright pride. Jason, his voice quiet, continued, "That was the hardest part. We were really mad at Mom and Uncle Rich for what they were doing to all of us. We didn't want to hurt you and Aunt Sue, but we couldn't do anything, so we sent you that first video. We kept trying to get you to visit Mom and Dad. We knew you were upset. If you pulled a weapon out of the safe, we would have told you everything we knew. You'd tell Aunt Sue. We kind of moved on. We already moved the money that Mom hid." He paused, his words heavy with guilt. "I think we stole it. Well, I know we stole it, but we figured they cheated us, so it was only fair. I hope you and Aunt Sue weren't too upset." As the conversation unfolded, I could feel the weight of the decisions we had all made. My children had acted out of anger, but their intentions weren't to hurt Susan or me. They were trying to protect themselves and their future. Still, I wasn't sure how to fully process everything that had been done in the name of justice. I looked at Susan, who had been silent, her expression a mixture of amazement and disbelief from the start. "I hope you kids never get mad at me and Sue," I said with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. "But if you ever nail me like you did your mother and Rich, I'll punch you. Just like I do if I'm in a nursing home with a walker." The kids chuckled at my threat, but De'Ara quickly reassured me, "You'll never have to worry about that, Daddy. We'll never let the family down. We can stick together, always." There was a brief pause before my dad spoke up. "One thing I don't get," he said, still processing everything. "You used my credit card to buy cell phone bugs? Those were awfully expensive. And where did you get the money for the video cameras?" Jason, never want to hide the truth, responded casually, "Yeah, they cost about $500 each. The cameras shoot full video with sound, plus motion and sound detectors. We bought 5 cameras and another $500 each for the hidden transmitters, which send the signal to a receiver we hooked up to De'Ara's computer." I did the math in my head. That's a total of $3,500, plus shipping. "But we can return them if we want to get half the money back," Jason added confidently. "We already pulled the cameras and transmitter. We probably lost the cell phone bugs, though." As for the credit card, Jason continued, "We used Dad's Visa card." I raised an eyebrow, not completely shocked. "I didn't have a Visa card," I said. So now we do, Jason replied without a hint of guilt. I applied for it and forged your signature. It's got a $10,000 limit. We've been getting the mail every day, so hiding it was easy. De'Ara chimed in. Cindy and I set up an email account called PissedOff999. Rob came up with the name because he was mad at what Mom and Uncle Rich did. The kids smiled proudly, and I had to admit, I was impressed. So, the bugs in the cell phones are still active? I asked, a little amazed at how far they'd gone. Dave nodded. Yeah, they work as long as the cell phone batteries are charged. Thanks to that and the phone location app, we know where they are and what they're doing at all times. If one of them is talking on their cell, we can hear it. It's voice activated, so it picks up car sounds and business talk too. We took turns going through the files to pick out anything important. Susan and I exchanged looks, understanding the power of what our kids had done. It gave us an advantage. We now had advanced knowledge of Bonnie and Rich's demands at the property division meeting. Bonnie, eager to get her jewelry, practically handed me the cash and housewares. We agreed to some of their requests, but we made them squirm along the way. Susan, in her usual bold manner, shocked everyone, except me, when she suggested they walk across town with signs on their heads saying, "We cheated on our spouses." The alternative was to appeal the alimony and child support amounts. I swear, I thought Budrow's eyes would pop out of his head at that threat. We overheard Budrow later, warning them that they had gotten off easy with the child support payments and that Susan and I would likely appeal the amounts. Susan eventually backed off from the extreme idea, but forced both Bonnie and Rich to apologize on their knees. I'm still not sure how exactly that happened, but it worked out in the end. A couple of months later, the insurance company where Bonnie and Rich had worked found out that Rich had rented an apartment for a love nest using company funds. That wasn't all. The premiums for the office had been unusually high, and Bonnie's were significantly higher than the others. Rich had been getting big bonuses too, and no one knew why. When everything came to light, both Rich and Bonnie were fired. It was no big deal to the company. They didn't want any publicity. As for the videos, none of them made it to the internet, and honestly, Susan and I didn't care. We joked over beers about how it would have been fun to make Bonnie and Rich stars, but the kids didn't want to embarrass themselves publicly, and we understood their point of view. Bonnie and Rich eventually moved to New Orleans, where they started working for a small shipping company. Since leaving town, they hardly ever visit the kids, and when they do, it's rarely more than a brief call. Last I heard, they're struggling to pay child support and alimony. I'll admit, I wish them well, maybe not too well. How far is too far when dealing with betrayal in a marriage? Should the children's actions be seen as justice or crossing a line? Is it ever justified to seek personal retribution like the main character? How does wealth and power influence family loyalty and decisions? Was the pursuit of money and vengeance worth it in the end? How does betrayal affect the children and their future relationships? How effective are prenuptial agreements in protecting against financial exploitation?